Hey, Coach K.
Yep, what's up?
Did you get my email?
Did you just send it?
I sent it on a Tuesday morning.
I don't think I got an email from you.
Okay.
I can go back and look right now, but
Okay, I was wondering.
did you send it just from your school email?
Yeah.
I did not get anything. So if you want, can you resend it to me?
Okay.
Was it important?
It was just my group. It's for the group project.
Right. Are you gonna do baseball?
Yeah, and I was gonna work by myself.
Okay, that's fine. I remember you telling me about that when we chatted last week, I think over Zoom. So I had you down for that already, but so if that's all that your email was, don't worry about sending me another one, but if you need to, go for it.
Okay.
Okay. We'll give everybody just another minute or two and then we'll get started, guys. All right, guys, we're gonna get started. So go ahead and turn your screens on and I'll just get other people in on attendance as they come. I don't wanna keep you guys too late. Okay, today we are gonna start, going over chapter 6, which is adaptations to aerobic training. Okay, so won't be a super long lecture. So if you guys have questions about stuff after pertaining to anything that we have coming up, go ahead and ask now. Next week on Tuesday, we will obviously be in class. Okay, so make sure you guys remember that in room 261. We probably also will not lecture the entire time. So I want to give you guys time with your groups or whether you're working alone to begin working on your form project. Okay, so then I'm actually there to answer questions if you guys may need, because sometimes that's easier than going through Zoom. Okay, so I want to make sure that I give you guys time for that. Okay, so we're going to jump right into this. And then if we have questions at the end, feel free to ask and we will go over what we have due next week. All right, cool. Okay, so we went over anaerobic adaptations. So now we're going to go over aerobic adaptations. Okay, so obviously aerobic training is training that involves oxygen. Okay, so it's going to be more endurance based. There's tons of different ways that you can go about aerobic endurance training. But every athlete, like field sport, anything along those lines, needs a little bit of aerobic endurance training, but it's going to obviously be dependent on your sport. So a cross country runner clearly is going to need mostly aerobic endurance training as opposed to say a shot putter in track and field, which really never uses their aerobic system. They're definitely more power. They're using their anaerobic system. Okay. So let's go through some key terms really quick, just as a review. Okay, to make sure you guys are on the same page. Okay, so you should have learned this a long time ago, but these are things that you are going to hear me reference throughout this course. Okay, so stroke volume. Okay, let's go to that before we talk about cardiac output. Stroke volume is the amount of blood that is pumped from your heart with every beat. Do you guys remember which chamber of your heart is pumping out the blood to the rest of your body, to the working muscles? Do you guys remember that?
The left ventricle?
Yes, absolutely. Left ventricle. Okay. So your stroke volume is your left ventricle, how much blood it can actually pump once with each heartbeat through the body. Okay. So as we aerobically train and anaerobically train, most of the time, if you are very aerobically trained, you are training that left ventricle, okay, to be able to be stronger like any other muscle in your body. Your heart is a muscle in your body, okay? You are training that muscle or that chamber, so that muscle, to be able to pump out more blood with each contraction throughout the body. Obviously, whether we are doing anaerobic training or aerobic training, we need blood to circulate what to our working muscles in our body. You guys remember? If we're doing aerobic training, what do we need?
Oh, no, not oxygen.
No,
Oxygen,
you're right.
yeah, oxygen,
Oh, you're right. Oxygen. Okay. Oxygen is needed to supply to our body. However, our heart is also delivering other nutrients to the working muscles of our body. Without this, obviously, we can't have any form of muscular contractions. We obviously also can't live. Okay. So your cardiac output, so you guys will see it denoted as a Q a lot of the times if it's not denoted as a CO. So make sure you're just aware of that. Your cardiac output is your stroke volume times your heart rate. So it's the amount of blood that is pumped out to your body, to your working muscles in 1 minute. Okay, so that is what your cardiac output. So you guys will hear me reference cardiac output a lot when we are talking about aerobic endurance training. Okay, so just remember cardiac output is that stroke volume times your heart rate, how much blood your heart is pumping out per minute. Okay, does that make sense to everyone? Okay, so obviously the more aerobically trained we are, the more blood we should technically be pumping out to our heart to the working muscles of our body. Okay. If we're talking about oxygen uptake, okay, so VO2, it's the amount of oxygen that can be used throughout exercise. So have you guys all heard the term VO2 max? I would hope at some point. Have any of you guys ever done VO2 max testing?
It sounds familiar.
Sorry, go ahead.
It sounds familiar, but I couldn't remember how it went.
So you probably have done it, but so actual VO2 max testing, if you were to do it in a clinical laboratory setting, you would have to do a test where you put something on your nose and mouth, and it's actually measuring the amount of air that is coming out. Okay, so it's measuring that carbon dioxide that is coming out of your body. So when you're breathing in oxygen, the more aerobically trained you are, the more of that oxygen you are actually using throughout your body. So in turn, when you are exhaling and you're expelling carbon dioxide, you should be expelling more carbon dioxide. Okay, so that's what that clinical form of VO2 testing is. That's technically the gold standard, but it takes expensive equipment to do. So there's other testing that you guys can do to test your VO2. So I don't know if any of you guys have done the fitness assessment class. I know, Glenn, you did the fitness assessment class with me. In that class and in other classes, you guys will learn different ways to test your VO2 that don't require expensive equipment. It's basically taking your heart rate, okay, and how far you can run in a certain amount of time, and then you calculate it. Obviously, that is not as accurate. So if you are an endurance trained athlete, okay, if you are an elite athlete, you are definitely doing the gold standard VO2 training, okay? But for everything else, just you can test it in many different ways. And we will also get into that in this class per se. Okay, so just think in terms of VO2 max. You guys are going to hear that a lot. It's the amount of oxygen your body actually uses during exercise. The more trained you are, the higher your VO2 max is going to be, meaning you utilize more of the oxygen that is put into your body. Okay, you're not expelling as much oxygen as someone who is untrained. Okay, resting oxygen uptake. So if you guys have ever heard of a MET, okay, we will also reference this, but we will go into more detail once we get into this unit. Okay, one metabolic equivalent, okay, is basically 3.5 milliliters per kilogram of oxygen per minute in your body. That is a mouthful, okay? But one MET is basically resting, okay? So as your METs go up, so think if it goes 2 METs, 3, 4, 5, 6, okay, the higher you go, the more intense that activity, okay? So the more intense or more oxygen you will be using for those activities, okay? Don't worry about this one so much right now. We will definitely go into that more once we get into that unit. I just want you guys to be aware of what a MET is. Okay, so now if we're also talking about, once we get into adaptations of aerobic training, really quickly, let's talk about blood pressure. So we remember what blood pressure is. I know you guys have all learned, okay? We might not remember. So remember, we have the systolic and diastolic. Do you guys remember what the top number is? Is that systolic or diastolic?
Systolic.
Systolic, yep. Okay, so the top number is systolic, the bottom number is diastolic. So your systolic blood pressure is basically the pressure during ventricular contraction. So every time that left ventricle pumps blood out, it is the pressure that is exerted on your artery walls in order to pump that blood out. Your diastolic blood pressure is the pressure during ventricular relaxation. So when your ventricle relaxes, okay, and is filling back up with blood before it pumps again. Okay, so those are the difference between the two numbers. So if you guys remember, technically they say that 120/80, okay, is normal blood pressure. If you look at the American Heart Association now, they say they want both of those numbers to be a little bit lower. So they believe that you are stage 1 pre-hypertension if you are anything above 120/80. Okay, so those numbers have changed a little bit, but keep that in mind. Keep that 120/80 number in your head so you have somewhat what to base it on, okay? So I just want you guys to remember what systolic, diastolic is, okay? So acute adaptation. So acute means something that is happening right now. It's not chronic, it's not long-term. We will go over that once we get into the chronic things. But so acute aerobic exercise results. So it increases your cardiac output. Okay. So obviously, as you start to do activity, your heart rate goes up. Okay, which would mean your heart is pumping faster and more, so it's going to increase your cardiac output. It's going to increase the amount of blood that it is pumping out to your body, okay, over the course of a minute, okay? With that being said, that would then also mean that your stroke volume would increase as well, okay? That's that one beat, how much blood is being pumped out through that left ventricle with one beat, okay? Heart rate should be a given. Anytime you guys start any form of exercise, whether it be anaerobic or aerobic, I know we're talking about aerobic right now, your heart rate's going to go up, okay? You're exerting more energy. Your heart needs to pump quicker to get nutrients and oxygen out to your body, okay? Oxygen uptake, okay? That's what we were talking about, those metabolic equivalents, okay? You're going to be using more oxygen throughout your body, so that is going to go up. Systolic blood pressure is going to go up. Okay. So remember, it's the pressure that left ventricle is exerting on your artery walls. Obviously, you're starting to work out. It's going to be pumping harder. Your systolic blood pressure is going to go up. Okay. And then obviously blood flow to active muscles is going to increase. That's just a given. If all of these things increase, your blood flow is going to increase. Okay. You're going to have a decrease in in diastolic blood pressure. Your heart is not relaxing. It's not going to relax as much. The way that we get our systolic blood pressure and our heart chambers to fill up again, it mostly does that at rest. Now that our heart is pumping quicker, okay, that blood pressure is going to actually drop because we're focusing on getting the heart or the blood out of the heart. Okay, so these are all acute adaptations to when we actually start exercise, okay, and when we're doing our aerobic exercise. Any questions on these things? Okay, so chronic adaptations. So let's remember, chronic adaptations are what happens over the long term. So if we are aerobically training, these are some of the changes that you guys can see happening. Okay. So your stroke volume is going to increase. If you are aerobically training, we are training our heart. We are training that left ventricle to be stronger and be able to actually pump out more blood with each heartbeat. Okay. Your resting heart rate is going to decrease. Okay. This is because your heart becomes more efficient. Okay. As your heart becomes more efficient, because your stroke volume is going up, your heart doesn't need to pump as fast at your resting levels. Okay. So it is becoming more sufficient. This takes training. Okay. Average heart rate resting heart rate for any individual is between 60 and 80. I don't know if you guys have ever taken your resting heart rates. Mine is low. Mine is like 55. I don't think it's because I'm very aerobically trained. I just tend to have lower blood pressure. So that's why my heart rate is down. But if you guys train, it gets your resting heart rate down. Elite marathon runners, they can get their resting heart rate down anywhere between 45 to 50 beats a minute. Okay. I'm not saying for a regular individual that's not trained, that's good. That's really not good. But if you are trained, that just means their heart is learning how to be efficient. It doesn't need to work as hard at those higher intensities. Okay. Cardiac output is also going to go up. So that is the amount of blood, remember, that you are circulating through your body in 1 minute. Okay. So it is going to go up. All right. But then it eventually plateaus and it'll stay at that level. That's where when you've become aerobically trained, it's there. It's at that level. Your heart has become efficient. It doesn't just continue to rise. So you have that linear relationship at first, and then it plateaus. Okay. So these are the chronic adaptations that you guys have to remember and think of. Questions on any of that stuff? Okay. Respiratory adaptations. Okay. So we're not going to get too much into this right now. We will touch more on this when we go into that actual unit. Okay. But there's a difference between lower body, upper body work. Okay. Even when you guys are anaerobically training, okay, and you are doing upper body exercises, your breathing rate skyrockets higher, okay, than you would be when you are doing lower body exercises. That's because we're lifting things above our heart and we are using smaller muscle groups. So we really have to work to get the amount of oxygen and stuff we need to there. If you're confused on this, don't worry about this now. We'll talk about it a little bit more. Tidal volume, you will hear me say this. Tidal volume is the amount of air you are breathing in and out in every minute. Okay. And your respiratory rate, how quickly you are doing that. This is synonymous to stroke volume and heart rate. Okay. So obviously your stroke volume and your heart rate go up. So your tidal volume is going to go up. So as we do this, the amount of air that you're inhaling and exhaling throughout aerobic endurance training is going to go up. So these work in conjunction with your stroke volume, your stroke volume and your heart rate. Okay. Nothing too crazy there. We don't have to spend too much time on that. Questions on anything that I've gone over thus far? Okay. Maybe you guys are just experts on this already. Okay, so let's talk about neural adaptation. So remember, that's that mind to muscle connection. Okay, we had neural adaptations in anaerobic training. We have to have neural adaptations for aerobic training. Okay, so overall communication becomes more efficient. Okay, there's going to be a delayed contractile fatigue. So what that means, if you're aerobically training, your endurance training, remember you want to sustain those muscle contractions, okay? You're going for the long term. It's not the same as maximal strength training or power training, the short term, okay? You don't want your muscles to fatigue and not be able to contract, okay? So you have that neural adaptation happening there. Okay. Obviously, you guys remember what an agonist muscle is. An agonist muscle is what is actually doing the prime muscle mover for the motion. Okay. Synergists are the muscles that help out with that. So when we have this delayed contractile fatigue and this neural adaptation, those synergist muscles also kick in and help out with the prime muscle mover, that agonist, to avoid this delayed contractile fatigue. Okay, kind of what I was just talking about here. Does that make sense to everybody? Remember, everything has to work together. Okay. All right. Okay. We already kind of went over that. Okay, let's switch to that. We didn't per se talk about this too much when we were talking about anaerobic training. We'll touch on it now since we have a slide on that, and we probably should touch on it. So if you guys remember, you have your type 2X, type 2A, and type 1 muscle fibers. Do you guys remember what those muscle fibers do? What is used for power, maximal strength, and what is used for endurance? Who can remember?
Type 2 was endurance, and type 1 was the muscle power.
So think about it again. So we have type 2X and type 2A, and then we just have type 1. So type 2X muscle fibers, okay, those are going to be considered your fast twitch muscle fibers. So if we're thinking fast twitch, okay, they produce the most power, but they are quick to fatigue. Okay, so you'll be using type 2X muscle fibers in maximal strength power exercises. Type 1 muscle fibers have much more mitochondria in it. Remember, the powerhouse of the cell that uses oxygen, okay? They don't produce as much power, but they're much slower to fatigue, okay? That type 2A is the intermediate ones, okay? That's the one that can mimic either type 2X or type 2-1, okay? So when you train, okay, you cannot take a type 2X fiber and create it as a type 2-1 fiber and vice versa. Doesn't work that way, okay? However, these intermediate muscle fibers, all right, you can train them to mimic what you are training. So if you're aerobically training and you have these type 2A or these type 2X fibers, they can switch and mimic what type 2A does. So that moderate intensity, but it goes vice versa. So if you have type 1 muscle fibers, okay, and you are training for maximal strength and power, you can get those to somewhat mimic type 2A. So it depends on your training. So if you are a power athlete more so, but you are training aerobically and you continue to train aerobically, you're going to see a shift in your type 2X fibers to become more like type 2A fibers. Does that kind of make sense to everybody? So this is why once we get into this, if we see so type 1 is more for aerobic endurance training. This is why when we get into our training programs, as a power athlete, let's say I'm a shot putter, why would I be doing aerobic endurance training all day? I wouldn't. All I'm going to be doing is then hurting my performance because I'm going to be taking those muscle fibers and having the ones that actually work quickly to produce power, and they're going to start shifting, okay, to start mimicking more how type 2A, which would mimic more type 1. Okay, the muscle fibers in your body, what you have is what you were born with, basically. Okay, some people are built more endurance based, some people are built more power based. Okay, it's just your genetics. Okay, you can train to get them to start to mimic the other ones, but even if we were to take a gymnast, okay, these gymnasts are probably as good as they are because they have that genetic capacity behind them. They probably have more type 2X fibers than they would type 2A fibers. Okay. Yeah. What's up, Flo?
So basically, like, say you have like a person that runs track and their distance and their sprint. So some days they go with distance and then some days they go with the sprinters. Would you consider that the training to get the muscles to kind of like join together, like the way your body will react, or what would you call that? Like,
So they would, yes. So they would have both muscle fibers and they would have to train for both of them. So if you have a sprinter and they're also training for distance, they're probably only training for, say, maybe somewhere between an 800 or a 1600 meter. They're not going to be doing anything crazy as in terms of half marathon distance. If they were doing that, if you were to look at a marathon runner versus a sprinter, their body makeup is completely different. You can tell sprinters, and even the ones that are saying running half a mile to a mile, maybe even 2 miles, they're training aerobically, but they also have the speed component behind it because they're really going for the speed behind that. So their training is going to be similar, yet they're going to have both of them, as opposed to someone that's just strictly marathon. Once you reach that point where it's all aerobically based, and don't get me wrong, they're still doing resistance training, but at a very different capacity than a sprinter would. Okay. But yes, I like where your head is at, how you are thinking, because there are certain sports that are going to, or events that would overlap. It's just that small area where you've gone too far. Now you probably won't be like if you're running an 800, you're not running all the way into a half marathon if you're training that. Does that kind of answer your question? Okay.
yes.
All right. Any other questions on kind of how muscle fibers work? Okay. If any of you guys are confused by any of this, just remember, this is basically an overview. Okay. So you can kind of get your heads thinking about what we will be doing when we are putting together these programs, and especially when you guys are putting together the programs for your sport. This doesn't have to be something where like, wow, I totally get it all right now. Okay. We will work with it as it comes to us. Okay. This is just a broad overview. Okay. Lastly on this, okay, so we have bone and connective tissue adaptations. We kind of went into this obviously with anaerobic training, okay? So for bone and tissue adaptations for aerobic training, you must have a combo of the magnitude, that intensity, and the rate and speed, okay? You have to include overload, which means you have to train. If you get to one point, you have to increase your training and get to the next point to increase your capacity, but you have to do it in a progressive sense so you have the rest behind it, so you don't go into the overtraining aspect of it, okay? Does this all somewhat make sense to you guys, or you have a better understanding as to what we are looking at as we get more into the meat of these chapters? Make sense? Okay. All right. We will also touch on this next week. So, okay, let's go over overtraining, detraining, retraining really quick. Again, this isn't not going to be super crazy detail because we will touch on all of these things as we get into these actual chapters. So if you guys have at some point in school, you should have heard of the general adaptation syndrome model, okay? It has 3 phases, okay? It's basically a model to teach you how you have to, where you're at, how to overload to get to that point, but how to get to that point for performance and not go past it, so then your performance goes down. So we're quickly just going to go through this. So we have the shock or alarm phase, which is that first phase. So think you guys are resistance training or you're aerobic training. You've done one program and now you're going into a new program. Okay. All right. So you're involving a new stimulus into your body. Okay. So say I am training for hypertrophy. Okay. So I'm training to gain muscle size. I have now completed that. Okay. And I'm now in the preseason aspect of my sport. So now I'm going to go into strength. That's going to go into power and going to go into more of actual movements that are specific to our sport. Okay. So once I switch that and I'm adding a new adaptation or a new stimulus to my body, your body's shock or alarm, as you want to call it, would include things like excessive soreness, stiffness, and even a decrease in performance. Okay, so if you guys have ever said, okay, I'm going to go to the next phase of my workout and you're sore the next day, that's your shock or alarm phase. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's if you take it past that point, that is bad. You need to basically shock your body, okay, and go into that overload in order to gain that performance, okay? So when this happens and you have that soreness, stiffness, when you have soreness and stiffness, just think about it. You're not going to be able to perform as well as you would on a regular basis if you're completely rested. Okay, so that is fine. It should only last several days. I know here it says last for weeks. It shouldn't last for weeks. If you're getting to weeks, you're getting to the overtraining portion of it. Okay, so then if you have that increase, okay, you have to make sure you manage it, you rest, so then you can get to the next phase. Okay, so your next phase would be that resistance and super compensation phase. Okay, so this is when neuromuscular adaptations occur. This is when your body says, hey, what are you doing? Okay, I understand it. Now I know how to work with it. Now it knows how to adapt to that stimulus. Okay, so muscle tissue changes that take place, you have biochemical, structural, mechanical. Okay, so say I added a movement that was for power. Okay, so I'm adding that speed component. Once my body understands this and it's going into the resistance super compensation phase, it gets that neural muscular connection. It gets that it needs to recruit those motor units and also fire them at a quick rate of speed. Okay, this is what's going to produce my power. Once it understands that, okay, and it's gotten it, it's going to lead to actual performance increases. Okay, so you've added that new stimulus. Maybe you've gone down a little because your body's not sure what to do. You continue with it, you rest it, and now it's going back up, and now it's leading to an increase in performance. Okay, here's where it gets tricky. Okay, now you get to the exhaustion phase. If you continue to add and add and add without proper periodization and rest and things like that, you are going to go tip off that scale and go way down and go into the exhaustion phase. Okay, this is when your body loses the ability to actually adapt to the stressor that you are putting on it. Okay, so it could be too intense, it could be too stressful. You could have things like poor diet. Are you not eating to fuel your body? You're not putting carbohydrates into your body to give you that energy. You're not eating protein to repair your muscle, things of that nature, or you're not getting enough sleep. The poor diet and not enough sleep go into these aspects a lot more than you think about it. When this all comes full circle, yes, you have to have periodization, rest, all those types of things, but you need to know how to fuel your body and you need to listen to your body and know when to rest. Okay, I've seen lots of athletes that have come to me and been like, oh, I'm so tired, I can't do this. And I ask them, like, are you sleeping? And they'll say no. This happens with my high school athletes all the time. Okay, they're studying until, I never studied until like 3 a.m., but they're studying until 3 a.m. They're not sleeping. Then they're coming in for a 6 a.m. workout and it's not working. Okay, so you have to be cognizant as the professional to be able to pick up on these things and be able to structure your program and know when to tell your athlete that they need to take a break so they don't get into that exhaustion phase. Okay, so this is kind of what it looks like. So you're going along, you add a new stimulus. Yes, you dip down a little bit, remember, because you have that alarm phase. Your body's like, whoa, what's happening? What is this? Okay. It acclimates to that. Okay. It goes up. You have that resistance supercompensation phase. You have that increase in performance. Technically, this line should continue until then you add another alarm phase. It goes down a little bit and goes up. But you teeter on this fine line and you can't continue to add new stimuluses until you've gotten to that phase. Your body is used to it, or you will then dip down into the exhaustion phase. Once you get into the exhaustion phase, the overtraining phase, it is a hard job to get yourself back. It takes weeks, if not months, of rest and recovery to pick yourself back up. Okay, so this is when you've gotten to like the super way overtrained phase. Okay. All right, so general terms you guys will have to know for this. So overload stimulus, okay, or if you just hear new stimulus, okay, it's a new exercise that you are adding. So just like we talked about, if we've gotten to the power phase of it, we added a new exercise. Or if we're doing sprinting, okay, or we're doing like 400-yard sprints, say you have to get it in a minute and a half. The next day, your coach says, okay, you have to get it in under 120. Okay, that's a new stimulus. You might be sore the next day. You might feel that because you pushed your body past it. That's okay. You just then have to know that you take a step back, the next workout, and then you add the stimulus again. Okay, acute fatigue is just your body responding to that training. Your body adjusts to it and just feels fatigued. Kind of like overload stimulus. It's the same thing. You just feel a little bit fatigued because you've obviously added a new stimulus onto your body. Okay. Overreaching is technically what you guys want to do. You want to do this to improve your performance. Okay. It's that new stimulus. But again, if your training is appropriate, that's great. If you continue to overreach, and you don't plateau where you need to, then this is when it could lead to overtraining because your recovery isn't complete. Okay. You don't have proper rest between the workouts. You continue to do the same workout, continue to stress the same muscle groups without switching your workout the next day or a day in between. Okay. And this is when you would become overtrained. Okay. Overtraining simply is just excessive training. It's too much for your body to handle and not enough recovery. Okay. So don't overthink the overtraining aspect of it. You've just basically done too much. You've done too much of the stimulus, and you haven't had enough time for your body to adjust to it or enough time for your body to recover from it. Okay. So when you hear that, this is what I'm talking about. Okay. Overtraining syndrome, okay, is unexplained decrease in performance. So it's the physical breakdown of tissue. So we experience overtraining syndrome. We have completely overtrained, and we are now on that downward trend where we don't want to be. Okay. It's a decrease in your performance, and where it says it's a breakdown of muscle tissue. Okay. Catabolism is a breakdown of your muscle tissue. Anabolism is a gain in muscle tissue. So if you guys have ever heard the term anabolic steroids, okay, people take anabolic steroids in order to grow muscle. Clearly they're illegal, but anabolism is generating muscle. Okay. So if we were doing this with a correct programming, we would be focusing on increasing our testosterone and human growth hormone in our body in order to gain the anabolism. Okay. We'll go into that more as well. Don't worry about that right now. So we want to avoid the catabolism. Can you guys think about why, if we are overtraining, how diet may affect this, why our body might become catabolic? Can you guys think of what we should be putting in our body that we're maybe not getting enough of?
Protein.
What else comes with protein though, that you guys want as well?
Carbs.
Remember we talked about, yes, you absolutely need that protein. You need that protein to help replenish and repair your muscle. But remember, you need those carbohydrates because you need those carbohydrates in order to keep your metabolism going. Remember, carbohydrates are used to create energy in your body and used to create ATP. We don't have that, and we don't have the carbohydrates in our body. Our body is going to take our protein that is supposed to be used for recovery, and it's going to use that for energy. And then this is when our body starts breaking down. Okay. So this is just trying to get you guys to think, yes, our nutrition is important in what we do, especially if we are training. We need to make sure we are eating to fuel our bodies. Okay. Certain causes of overtraining syndrome. Okay. We've probably talked about most of these, but excessive high intensity exercise. High intensity exercise is needed, but if you guys have a high intensity workout, you should have a break between it, and the next day of your workout should not be as high intensity of that. This will become more apparent to you guys when we go into the periodization of our programming, okay? Improper rest and recovery, I've already talked about that. You need to rest, you need to recover, sleep, diet, things of that nature. Improper load progression. So improper load progression is if you increase the intensity, or not the intensity, the weight too much. Okay. There's a certain way that you should be increasing your weight, which we will always also get into. So say I'm squatting 150 pounds and the next workout, I'm not going to try to go squat 200 pounds. Okay. Way too much of an increase. So that's your improper load progression. Overuse joint actions. So let's just take running, for example. Okay. This is why running needs to have, resistance training in it. Running is the same repetitive motion over and over and over and over in your sagittal plane. There is no frontal plane. There is no horizontal plane. Okay. So if we continue to do that over and over, it's the same joint actions. It's going to wear away our body. Okay. So this is why as a runner or anyone, you need to have that recovery, and you need to also train in other planes of your body. Okay. Same could be said for all sports. Okay. So if you're trying to gain upper body strength, I wouldn't just continue to do things in the horizontal plane and just bench and do rows. I need to make sure that I'm working in the frontal plane and I'm working on pull-ups, lat pull downs, shoulder presses, things of that nature. Okay. So it needs to be a multi-planar program with many different joint actions. Okay. Incorrect form, that's a big one. Okay. If you're not using proper form, you're not activating the correct muscles, you are also wearing away at your joints. Okay. So this is number one in my book. When you guys start to do a program, you better make sure you have proper form and conquer that before you are loading your body. And every time you load your body with more weight, you need to make sure you have that proper form before you put more stress on it. Okay. Rule of thumb, if you go up and you put the weight up and your form is not correct, you need to drop that weight down. Your body is not at that point where it can lift that weight properly. Okay. Little to no variation in your program. Okay. This goes full circle with everything I talked about. You need variation. It can't be the same thing over and over and over again. Then all you're doing is stressing the same muscles, the same joints, the same actions. You need variance in it. Okay. Improper exercise order. Okay, so this will go, you guys will learn a lot about this once we go into our programming. Okay, you have to remember power exercises go first. They use the most amount of energy in our body. They use that PC system. Okay, so we need to do that first. Then it goes to structural multi-joint exercises. Okay, and then it can go down to assistance exercises. So maybe single leg squats, you're not using as much weight per se, and then single joint exercises. So there's a proper way to do it. So you are stressing your body properly and you have the correct energy to be able to do all the movements. Okay. Any questions on that stuff? Okay. All right. So symptoms of overtraining. Okay. You guys should probably be able to pick up on most of these. Okay. Decreased desire to train. Okay. It's not just physical, it's mental. Okay. If an athlete gets to the point of overtraining symptom and they do not want to train, it has taken a toll on them mentally as well. They're tired. Imagine if you guys don't get enough sleep one day and you wake up cranky and you're like, oh, I don't want to do that. Same thing goes with school. Okay. So it goes into the aspects of your training. Okay. Change in appetite. Okay, either they have become so hungry because they're constantly using their stores, or more sense, they'll probably just be tired and they won't be hungry. Okay, insomnia, you're not able to sleep well. I hope none of you actually have insomnia, because it basically means you're not sleeping at all. Fatigue, irritability, loss of motivation, lack of concentration, depression. These are all things that mean you have already gotten to that overtraining syndrome. Okay. So as a fitness professional, okay, if we're looking at this has now gotten to the point where we have way overtrained, and now we're going to have to take an active rest for weeks, maybe even a month, okay, to get back to where we could be. In the performance aspect, there are ways to pick up on if we're getting towards overtraining before we get to all of this. What are some things you guys could see in an athlete, maybe that doesn't involve like mood, things of that nature, that could lead you to believe that they are trending towards overtraining? Does anybody have any idea?
Posture.
Posture is one. Why do you think posture would be one?
Because your body, I don't know, I guess like their body language would tell, like, you know, if they feeling really tired or they kind of slouching, or not
They'll-
normally like up, you know, looking like themselves, I guess.
Right. So go
Because
off the posture thing. So that's a good observation. So now if we have the posture thing, okay, and they're obviously tired, how do you think their movement is going to fare when they're actually doing exercises? What could be wrong with the exercises?
Slow and like half done, like they're not giving it their all.
Improper form.
Yeah, improper form.
Form, right? Maybe they're not able to lift the load that they should lift, even if it's not that maximal load, because a lot of workouts, even say you're in a strength-based workout, maybe one day you're at 90% of your 1 rep max. The next 2 consecutive workouts, maybe you're at 80%, maybe you're at 75%. So yeah, maybe they can't lift that 90% that day, but then and maybe they're just having an off day. But then if you get to the next workout, they can't lift 85% of their 1 rep max. The next workout, they can't lift 75% of their 1 rep max. That should be a red flag saying, their performance isn't as good. One day here or there is one thing. If it's an entire week, then you guys should obviously, there should be something in your head that says, I need to check this out. Okay. So yeah, so obviously posture, improper form, all those types of things would lead to red flags as you guys looking into, okay, well, maybe they're teetering towards overtraining. We don't want to get to this point where they have no desire, they're not sleeping, they're depressed, they're irritable. We have now crossed that line, and it's going to be a long time to get back to it. Okay. So see, as fitness professionals, you guys really need to make sure you are watching your athletes and you're watching the correct, or making sure you're putting together the correct programs in the correct manner to avoid this overtraining. Okay. If you do get to the overtraining part, kind of like what I said already, it's complete rest. It's not active rest. This does not mean I'm going out and walking around or jogging lightly. I am completely resting, doing absolutely nothing for 2 or more weeks. It is dependent on the athlete and the scenario. Okay. So there's no, oh, it's just 2 weeks. It could be more. Okay. Then it's followed by a vast reduction in your actual intensity for 4 to 6 weeks when you guys go back to training. So this is what I'm trying to get you guys to realize. Once you tip yourself over the edge, or your athlete tips yourself over the edge, it is much harder to get back. Okay. There's going to be a lot that goes into it to, in order to get that athlete back to it. Okay. Ways to avoid overtraining. I've basically touched on most of this. So periodization, this is going to be a huge chunk of what we do in this class. Okay. You guys have to know how to put programs together properly for any sport it might be. Even if it's not a sport that you are familiar with, you have to understand how to do it. Okay. So yes, proper exercise order. We went over that already, using all your joint actions and proper form. So you guys already know all of these things. Okay. A little bit, there's a difference between overtraining syndrome versus overreaching. Okay. Overreaching, you may have the same symptoms, but this is going to be cured by adequate recovery. Okay, so overreaching sometimes might be good. You might want to do that for your athletes sometimes, so you get that stimulus, but then it must be followed by active rest or decrease in intensity. Okay. Or if you guys have gotten to the point where you're like, oh, okay, I see this athlete kind of diminishing in performance, they might be at that overreaching point, then you pick up on it and you know that they need to rest. So treatment would be a couple days or a couple weeks of active or complete rest. The active versus complete rest is going to depend on the individual and how far they have overreached, how tired they actually are. If you are allowed to have active rest, that means you're just muscle soreness, things of that nature, a small decrease in performance, maybe you can have active rest. If you've already gone down past that and you're resting for a few days, if not a week, it hasn't gotten better, then that's probably when you would go to the complete rest without any active stuff in between. Okay. We are almost done, guys. I know this is a lot. Okay. Recovery versus detraining. Recovery is a metabolic process that occurs in the body. So more anabolism. So remember, protein, repairing our body, refueling our carb stores. Okay, so this is a recovery process. Okay, dependent on proper diet and rest, and it typically lasts 24 to 48 hours. May take longer depending on the damage. So whether you guys have had a workout one time and you're like, oh God, maybe you did eccentrics one day, okay, and the next day you're super sore. Okay, it may take you 48 hours before you can obviously do your next workout. Okay, it's going to depend on the athlete. It's going to be dependent on the workout that you have had. Okay, detraining is also something that happens and athletes will actually do. Sometimes we detrain in order to bring the intensity down, allow athletes and their bodies to rest and recover. Okay, a lot of the times detraining happens in the postseason, so after your actual season. Okay, or it can also happen if you are just completely inactive. If that athlete has just decided, I'm just taking a 2-week break, I'm detraining. Okay, so the body is going to get rid of what's not being used. So all catabolism, no anabolism. Okay, sometimes athletes take rests for a week. Okay, but they might be fueling their bodies, things of that nature. Most of the time, detraining will not happen within a week. Okay, it is a lot easier to lose what you have done aerobically than it is resistance training wise. Okay, and we'll go over that more once we get into those chapters. Okay, and then after an extended amount of no activity, so 2 weeks or more, it's different for each person. This is when you will detrain. Sometimes this is okay. Sometimes it just depends on if an athlete is not doing it. So obviously, when this entire pandemic started last year, okay, and we thought for my lacrosse season, we thought we were still going to have it. My athletes, some of them just did not have the motivation. Okay, they gave up. I don't blame them. Okay, and so say they didn't do anything for 2 weeks, they started to detrain by that point already. So it would have been a bit of, if we did continue our season, it would have been a little bit of a process to get them back to where they were. They wouldn't have been able to just jump in it right away and have everything back. Okay, does this make sense to everybody? Yep. Okay. We went over that. Okay, so let's go over muscle strength, hypertrophy, and power, how to retrain that, okay? So return to regular activity no more than 6 weeks later. So if you are detraining, okay, you don't want to rest completely for more than 6 weeks, okay? Mostly if you do little intermittent workouts here and there, you can retrain or you can regain some muscle mass and strength. Okay. It's easier for an untrained individual to retrain than it is an individual that's been training. Okay. Think of an individual that's been training for months and months and months, years. Okay. How long it has taken that individual to get to that point. If it takes that individual that long to get to that point, once you stop training, you're losing all those stimuluses. It's going to take you that much longer. An untrained individual, okay, say they've been training for a month and then they stop, they haven't really gained much more other than the neurological aspects of contracting muscles and things of that nature. So it's going to be easier for them to gain that back. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? So just remember, Untrained, it's easier to get back than if you are trained. Okay. Detraining, it does not affect muscle strength as much. Okay. So getting back into resistance training, like I said, is easier than cardio. Okay. It's harder to lose strength than it would be cardio. However, once you lose that resistance training, it's harder to gain that back. Okay. So you can lose cardio quicker, but you can gain the cardio back quicker. So that's just the rule of thumb. It's not linear. Okay. So resistance training, harder to lose, but harder to gain back. Cardio, harder to lose, easier to gain back. Okay. Going over that. Okay, so maintaining muscular strength and hypertrophy. Okay, so if you guys are just in the postseason, you don't want to train as much, you've worked hard to get certain strength, okay, and you want to maintain this, okay, without doing crazy workouts. So rule of thumb is 1 standard session every 10 to 14 days will help maintain the strength that you have for up to 6 weeks. Okay, so again, we have that 6-week mark. If we go past that 6-week mark, things start to obviously diminish a little bit more. However, what you guys have to look at here, if you were training for strength and you want to keep up your strength and you are doing intermittent workouts, you need to be working out specific to that goal. So if I'm training muscular strength and then I start to work out intermittently, I'm not going to be doing workouts for muscular endurance. I have to do workouts for that muscular strength. It is specific to the goal that I want to retain. Okay. So same thing with power, things of that nature. If I'm trying to maintain my power, my speed component of these exercises, then I am training for power in those workouts. Okay. For muscular endurance retraining, so return to activity no more than 2 weeks later. So you guys can see here, after 2 weeks, your cardio, your muscular endurance starts to diminish. Okay. So in order to maintain this muscular endurance, okay, you need 3 muscle endurance sessions a week. That's a lot. Okay. So you can lose muscular endurance a heck of a lot quicker than power, strength, hypertrophy. Okay. That's just what I want you guys to take away on this. Okay. 2 more slides. We're almost done. Cardiovascular endurance. Okay. So detraining affects the heart muscle the most. So if you guys are not working on your cardio as a cardio athlete, detraining is going to affect your heart muscle. You have to remember your heart is a muscle. We're trying to work on gaining that stroke volume, remember, and that cardiac output. We want to increase that. Okay. So it takes longer to retrain for cardio. All right. Retraining. So return to regular activity no more than 2 weeks later, kind of the same thing with muscular endurance. And you want to maintain 3 cardio sessions per week at a minimum of 30 minutes at 70% of your heart rate reserve. Okay. So you don't want to be having cardio training between that 40 and 60% of your heart rate reserve. That's really just steady all out. You still want to be getting that heart rate back up. Okay. So last slide on this, we've already talked about this, but the only effective prevention of overtraining is periodization. Okay. So I'm going to say that over and over and over and over again in this course. You guys need to know how to periodize a program. Okay. It's going to be a variation of how you structure your workouts, what exercises you're using, how many sets and reps you are doing, what you are working on in the preseason, what you are working on in the postseason, what you are working on in season. Okay. It is going to be how effective your program is and how you get to not overtrain someone is if you learn how to periodize that program correctly. Okay. This takes work. I still have to work with periodizing programs and making sure that I'm watching my athletes, structuring the sets and reps and intensity correctly so they are gaining what they need instead of the program hindering them more. Okay. Any questions on any of the stuff that we went over? I know I just threw a lot of stuff at you guys, so it's okay if you're a little bit confused. I know it's a review, but if you haven't done this in a while, it's a lot to review upon. Okay. So any questions on this stuff? Okay, make sure you guys throughout whatever we are doing, and we will obviously touch base on this again next week before we go into quizzes, tests of that nature. I still have not decided if I'm just going to give you a quiz or just give you a test. I more so want you guys to get used to how the testing format is going to be for the rest of the classes. So bear with me. You don't have a quiz or a test due yet. I will give you all that information when we are going to do it. We might even end up just doing it together so you understand how the wording of the questions are. Okay. If you did not read over chapters 5 and 6, they're not that long. I do realize they get wordy, but read over the chapters. Even if you guys read over it and you don't think that you understand it all, you have probably picked up a concept in there that you are not sure of, and it's going to help you throughout the rest of the class. I know how tedious it can be to read, but I can't tell you how important as a student it is to read chapters on your own. I cannot take the entire book and go through everything with you. Okay. If you guys ever go in, whatever you choose to go into in your lives, if you choose to go something this route, reading is going to be important. Okay. So even if you guys there's certain concepts in here that you don't quite understand, reread just that section, whatever you may do. Utilize the book, utilize the charts, utilize the questions that are at the back of each chapter, and then the answers are in the back of the book. This is how your questions are going to be laid out on your exams. Okay, so it's helpful for you guys to just go over it. I know when I was studying for this, I went over it 1,000,001 times, and I still have to go over it. Okay. All right. So if we have no questions on any of that stuff, next Tuesday, we will be in class. We will be going over chapter 7, which is the last chapter in this unit. Okay. We probably won't be lecturing the whole time. I want to give you guys, whether it's individually or with your group, time to start thinking about your resistance training exercises. Okay. That is going to be due not this coming Sunday, next Sunday. Okay. I believe that's Super Bowl Sunday. So think about that. You don't want to be doing it on Super Bowl Sunday. So get it done before. I don't know if you guys are into Super Bowl, but just putting that out there. I know I wouldn't want to be doing it that night. Okay, so just think about it and make sure you guys come to class Tuesday with questions. I am there to help you guys. It's a lot easier sometimes to go over stuff in person than it is online. So I want to make sure I give you guys time that day. Thursday, we will obviously be on Zoom, but we will be reviewing everything that we have gone over. So if I do give you an exam, and guys, don't worry, I'm not going to be grading this hard. Okay. You guys will be ready to go. Okay. And we will obviously review and go over things together. So this unit is more so for review before we get into the core meat part of our actual class. Okay. All right. I will stick around for a few minutes in case you guys have any questions. Otherwise, you guys have a great weekend, and then I will see you all in class on Tuesday.
You too.
Bye, guys.
All right, bye-bye.
Professor K.
Yes.
So